always have enough faith to call out to the Master. Where I'm trying to go, Jesus is already there. He gives me an invitation to come. There's no one or nobody that is stronger than the God we serve.
Good evening and welcome back again, and welcome into 2022. We are back with our Bible study. Hey, I hope you enjoyed our break time off as much as I did. And I tried to do just like our pastor does. During the Christmas season, we take a couple of weeks off to give you time to do your Christmas shopping and enjoy your family. So now we're back, and I know and I hope you enjoyed our series that we were doing on the 37 miracles that Jesus performed throughout his 3.5-year ministry. Now, we may get right back to that. But the start of this year, what I want to do is I like to do theme messages. I like to have our Bible study and our sermons coincide with each other to keep us on a general theme, so it's easy for the family to get together and study. So as you see what's happened, this goes in a 3-part series because our pastor started. If you watched our watch night service on Friday night, and it's still up on YouTube and available for you to watch it, he started in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and he was talking about David versus Goliath, and then I continued the message that he started at that time. I started back, and we talked about facing the giants on Sunday. And tonight I want to pick up from right there again, and we're going to get right back into 1 Samuel with 1 Samuel chapter 16 and 17. We're going to combine them together, and we're going to look at what I talked about on Sunday to another extent. Tonight we're going to talk about battling the bully. So let's get right into our lesson. Today we take a look back at a battle between a champion warrior and an underdog youngster, armed with the desire to prove to everyone that his faith could overcome the fears of a nation. David is a young teenager, about 15 years of age, when Samuel pours the oil on him, and it flows right in front of his brothers. And it is determined that David will replace Saul as king. You find this story in 1 Kings chapter 16, verses 1 through 13. David begins a very close relationship with Saul after he is recommended to Saul for his harp-playing ability that was needed by Saul to soothe the sickening presence of an evil spirit that God had placed on the current king, being Saul. David now becomes Saul's armor bearer. 1 Samuel, chapter 16, verse 23 says, anytime the evil spirit from God came on Saul, David would take his harp and play it. The evil spirit would leave Saul, and he would begin to feel better. Now, David was Saul's armor bearer, but not a soldier in Saul's army, like his 3 eldest brothers. So when Saul became sick from the evil spirit, he would call for David, who was still with his father, Jesse. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 14 and 15 says this, David was the youngest son. The 3 oldest sons were in Saul's army. But David left Saul from time to time to take care of his father's sheep at Bethlehem. As the war between the Philistine army and the Israelites waged on, Jesse sent David with a simple assignment. It says in verse 17 and 19 through 19, one day Jesse said to his son David, take this basket of cooked grain and 10 loaves of bread to your brothers in the camp. Also take these 10 pieces of cheese for the officer who commands your brother's group of 1,000 soldiers. So see how your brothers are doing. Bring back something to show me your brothers are all right. Your brothers are with Saul and all the Israelite soldiers in the valley of Elah. They are there to fight against the Philistines. Now, David's simple assignment changed when he discovered that a people of faith were weak in spirit and lacked faith when it came to knowing and understanding the capabilities of Jehovah God. His assignment became a mission to prove to not just the Philistines, but also his own people that the might of Jehovah is uncomparable. He was now ready to face a giant and battle a bully named Goliath. Why do I call Goliath a bully? Well, you have to take a look at his attitude and how he taunted the army of Israel, as well as how he saw any representation of this blessed nation. Let's treat this battle like it was a boxing match. So let's take a look at the combatants, or let's take a look at what we call in boxing the tail of the tape. The contender is always introduced and comes to the ring first. So let's see how David matches up and comes to the ring. You'll find in 1 Saul chapter 16, verse 12, you'll find this about David. Jesse sent someone to get his youngest son. This son was a good-looking, healthy young man. He was very handsome. Then in 1 Samuel, chapter 17, verse 12, it says, David was the son of Jesse, and Jesse was the Ephrathite family in Bethlehem, Judah. And he took his staff in his hand and chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had, even in a scrip, which is a purse or a pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Now let's take a look at the champion, Goliath. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Let's just call it for safekeeping. Goliath was 9 feet tall, about 9 feet 6 inches to be exact. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. Now, that account that I gave to you, that one actually comes from the King James Version, not from the version before that I said, the easy to read version. But if you allow me to, what I can do is, let me see if I can pull up the account that gives us the measurements and the dimensions that we talked about when it comes to a language that we can understand when it comes to talking about Goliath. So once again, look with me at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 2 through 8. This is coming from the easy to read version once again. It says, Saul and Israelite soldiers also gathered together. Their camp was in the valley of Elah. And Saul's soldiers were lined up and ready to fight the Philistine. The Philistine was on one hill, and the Israelites were on the other hill. The valley was between them. The Philistines had a giant fighter named Goliath, who was from Gath. He was 9 feet tall. Goliath came out of the Philistines' camp, and he had a bronze helmet in his hand. He wore a coat of armor that was made like the scales of a fish. This armor was made of brass and weighed about 125 pounds. Goliath wore protectors on his legs. He had a bronze javelin tied to his back. The wooden part of his spear was as big as a weaver's rod, and the spear's blade weighed 15 pounds. Goliath's helper walked in front of him, carrying the shield. Wow, Goliath is a really big guy. So, as the war, let me back up. Okay, so we see what Goliath looked like. What we look at now is we want to once again look at how David is approaching this battle and how Goliath looks as he walks to the ring. So we see now, we come to a section I call the trash talking or the bullying of the champion. Verse 8 says, And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battles in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Now, I want you to notice something here. Armies are gathered together to fight, but the real fight boils down to only two men. Goliath challenges a representative from the army of Israel. Now, mind you, it's been trash talking going on, and only by Goliath. For 40 days now, he's come out and he's uttered these words to just harass and abuse verbally these armies of Israel. And no representative from the army speaks. The Bible even tells us when Goliath comes their way, they take off and they run. Verse 11 says, when Saul and all Israel heard those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. But I want you to look at the rebuttal of the challenger, David. Verse 26 says, David asked the men standing near him, what did he say? What is the reward for killing this Philistine and taking away this shame from Israel? Who is Goliath anyway? He is only some foreigner, nothing but a Philistine. And I love the way the King James Version describes this verse. It says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? When he says uncircumcised, you have to take it to the custom of the Jews of circumcision being their connection to God through the cutting of the foreskin. This was not a custom for the Philistines, but a custom of Israel, a custom of the Jews that recognized them as being the people of God. Goliath was not a person affiliated or a citizen of the nation of Israel. He was from the nation of Philistine. David also faced one big obstacle that a lot of us face, and I want to talk about briefly here, is who is supporting you when you go into battle? Where does your moral support come from? And unfortunately for David, the place where he thought he would get it from, he didn't get it from that place. His moral support did not come from his family. We see in verse 28, it says, David's oldest brother, Eliab, heard David talking with the soldiers and became angry. Eliab asked David, why did you come here? Who did you leave those few sheep with in the desert? I know why you came down here, and you didn't want to do what you were told to do. You just wanted to come down here to watch the battle. You know, I find it very funny that his brother gets an attitude and accuses David of doing something that Eliab himself didn't even want to do. Look at it again, what he says. He asked David, why did you come down here? Who did you leave the sheep with? And he says, I know why you came down here. You didn't want to do what you were told to do. Remember the instructions from Jesse? We talked about them before. He told David to carry his brother some food. Give some food to the head officer of the company that David's brothers, his three eldest brothers, were fighting with, to give the leader of the commander of that troop some food, and to bring back to Jesse evidence of how the brothers are doing with the battle. Well, guess what, Jesse? David don't have no evidence for you because ain't nobody been fighting. They have not been fighting. They've been running. They have been running from Goliath. So there's no evidence of how they do in the war. They're doing just fine in the war because they have not lifted up their armor or their weapons to be in battle. But what was lifted up was their fear. And their fear caused them to run from the battle. But now here comes David. And this is what he says in verse 29. David said, what did I do now? I didn't do anything wrong. I was only talking. See, let me tell you what's about to happen. When everybody begins to doubt David, David gets prepared to give his testimony. And David has given his testimony since the event occurred, because David knows very well who God is, because Jehovah has proved himself to David. And David is telling this story to the other men. He's giving his testimony when his eldest brother hears him. And that's why his eldest brother gets this attitude and makes the statements that he made before, starting to ask David why he came here. And you didn't do your assignment, and I know why you're here. But this is what happens with David. And before I get there, I want you to remember this. Your testimony can only come after you've been tested. And secondly, never stop telling your testimony. Your testimony proves that you passed the test, and it glorifies God. And it may be tiresome to some people, but it's encouraging to someone else, even if the only person you're encouraging is you. David's testimony, when faced with doubt, he loved to brag about his triumphant battle with the beast. Let me take you to this battle. It says in verse 34, but David said to Saul, there were times when I was taking care of my father's sheep, that wild animals came to take some sheep from the flock. Once there was a lion, and another time a bear. I chased that wild animal, attacked it, and took the sheep from its mouth. The wild animal jumped on me, but I caught it by the fur under its mouth and hit it and killed it. I killed both a lion and a bear like that. And I will kill that foreigner, Goliath, just like them. Goliath would die because he made fun of the army of the living God. The Lord saved me from the lion and the bear. He will also save me from this Philistine. Now I want you to hear Goliath's verbal assault on David. This is what Goliath says in verse 41 through 44. The Philistine slowly walked closer and closer to David. Goliath's helper walked in front of him carrying a large shield. Goliath looked at David with disgust. He saw that David was only a handsome, healthy boy. Goliath said to David, what is this stick for? Do you come to chase me away like a dog? Then Goliath used the names of his gods to say curses against David. He said to David, come here, and I'll feed your body to the birds and wild animals. But I want you to look at the confidence of the king. We're looking at the King David before he's even crowned king. Remember, he's already been anointed with the oil coming from Samuel. Samuel anointed him with the oil, and it did flow upon David. Verse 45 says, David said to the Philistine, you come to me using sword, spear, and javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord all-powerful, the God of the armies of Israel. You have said bad things about him. Today, the Lord will let me defeat you. I will kill you. I will cut off your head and feed your body to the birds and the wild animals. And we will do the same thing to all other Philistines too. Then all the world will know there is a God in Israel. All the people gathered here will know that the Lord doesn't need swords or spears to save people. The battle belongs to the Lord, and he will help us defeat all of you. Let's take a look at the battle as we close this out. The battle begins with verse 48. It says, Goliath, the Philistine, started to attack David. He slowly walked closer and closer to David, but David ran out to meet Goliath. Notice the rest of the army of Israelite, when Goliath came out, they ran the opposite direction, but not David. David is now running to meet Goliath on the battlefield. David took out a stone from his bag. He put it in his sling and swung the sling. The stone flew from the sling and hit Goliath right between the eyes. the stone sank deep into his head, and Goliath fell to the ground, boom, face down. So David defeated the Philistine with only a sling and one stone. He hit the Philistine and killed him. David didn't have a sword, so he ran and stood beside the Philistine. Then David took Goliath's own sword out of its sheath and used it to cut off his head. That is how David killed the Philistine. What a mighty God we serve. Look at the faith of a young man, a teenage boy. Like I said, Sunday, he only had his learner's permit. He didn't even have his official driver's license. He was only 15. So young people, don't get discouraged because somebody says you're not old enough to do something. No one has control over how God is going to use you. You just have to have the desire to let God use you any way he pleases. And trust me, God knows exactly how to use whoever he chooses. He's choosing you, and he's here to help you fight your battles. He's here to defeat the bullies on the battlefield, whether it be in a classroom, whether it be at work, at your church, in your community, wherever you go. You never travel without God because he's there before you get there, and he's there with you. He said he'll never leave you. And he'll never forsake you. God is not forgotten. And I often am guilty of this. I feel sometimes as God has forgotten about those people that have done wrong by me. But you know what? God's timing is not our timing. In his own time, he's going to take care because he's a God of promise. He said, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. And trust me, he will repay. He's going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. So yeah, let your enemies, in their brief battles and their brief victories, let them go ahead and celebrate and feel as though they've gotten away from things during the battle, but they've not won the war. God will have you victorious. He's made you the head and not the tail. He's made you the lender and not the borrower. He's made you the leader and not the follower. Trust in him with all your mind, heart, and soul, and he will make you victorious. We are more than victorious. We are more than just conquerors. We are his sons and his daughters. We are his people. And he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. So seek after him. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness. And trust me, good things will follow. We're walking into a new year. But we're walking into this year with the attitude and a mindset that we are victorious through Christ. We are claiming victory in the battle, not tomorrow, not next week, not months from now, but right now. We are claiming that we are more than conquerors. We are victorious in God. There's no one like him. There's no one that can defeat you when God fights our battles for us. What he put into that stone that David released from his sling was what I call the new improved GPS. Yes, I know we have them in our cars and on our phones, and it stands for Global Positioning System. No, not today. It means two things. It means God's purpose and good praise system. That's what we are arming ourselves with. Because when praises go up, blessings come down. Don't look for your blessings until you praise them. But you know what? God is all powerful. And even in his power, he blesses us when we haven't yet praised him, because that's what he wants to do. He proves himself. And even when we prove not to be faithful, because he has a plan for us. And his divine plan for us overrides our lack of faith. The Bible tells us he's given to each one of us a measure of faith. And it's up to us to put the muscle in our measure. I've always said this for years. Faith is a muscle that has to be exercised daily. So as we walk into 2022, be bold, be brave, be blessed. May God bless you and keep you is our prayer.